Hello everyone, welcome back to the Dark Pixel Podcast. We're recording for the second time today. My name is Mike.
I'm Kason. Welcome.
So here's the deal. This is going to be a world record podcast time. We're going to see if we can get this in under 20 minutes.
It was already going to be short. We only have 4 topics.
4 topics.
But it's going to be really short.
Let's see, how long was it the first time?
The whole thing, and we don't have it.
Well, like we do have it. So, like, here's the problem, right? So we recorded it, and we're... Yeah. I can't go into too much detail with this. We have a record time, and we're trying to get it here. So, anyways, my mic was off. His was on. We have everything he said. We don't have anything I said. Because I had been using the program to record footage yesterday, and I had turned my mic off so that when I'm recording the footage, it doesn't have my mic embedded in the freaking game audio.
Right.
So that's why I did that. And then I forgot to turn it back on.
If people are really good at reading lips, we could just upload the original.
Holy fetch. It's a challenge, dude.
See if you can
all the audio-only people will be so confused.
Oh, gosh. Yeah, that'd be terrible.
Anyways.
All right.
Our first topic for today is this. The Kingdom Hearts 3 trailer from last week. Kason wasn't on the podcast last week, so we didn't have a chance to talk about what he thought of the Kingdom Hearts 3 trailer. He's our resident Kingdom Hearts expert. Let's.
I am an expert, dude.
Let's hear.
I'm not an expert, but I've played all the games. So how about that? So Kingdom Hearts 3, the game looks freaking cool. Like the Monsters Inc. world, everything about it just looks super cool. They've shown more of the Tangled world. They've shown more of. I think we got some Marluxia secrets and some more Vanitas stuff going on there. I think he's wearing a helmet because Sora still doesn't know who he is because it's Sora. Right. That's going to be a crazy reveal when that happens.
Well, doesn't he call him Ventus or something in the trailer there towards the end?
Oh, jeez.
The character.
I'd have to watch it again.
Hold on. Kingdom Hearts.
Oh, he calls Sora. You're talking. I thought you meant does Sora call Vanitas?
No. Vanitas calls Sora something else other than.
And Sora's like, wait, I knew. Okay, I get the whole like Roxas thing, but what? There's another person. Anyways, it's gonna be crazy.
So he says. So he comes up to him. I need the half of me that sleeps on inside your heart.
Yep.
And then he says, Vanitas. Huh? What? And then he says, Ventus. What a strange place to slither off to. So this guy is calling
exactly.
Sora Ventus, which is the Roxas character model that is used Birth by Sleep. But the kid's name is Ventus.
Square Enix knows how to reuse assets, man.
So
they know how to get
Ventus is not the same person as Roxas, right? Or are they the same guy?
No.
But he looks
because Roxas is essentially
exactly
a nobody.
The same.
He does, and the reason Roxas looks the way he does was because Ventus was like chilling in Sora's heart.
So is Ventus Sora? Are they the same person?
No. So Sora has a lot of people in his heart. He's got a lot of different people just chilling out in his heart. He's got a big heart, as they say. So, but the different people within his heart can manifest a little bit differently. Like, for instance, when Sora's nobody becomes a nobody, it was actually like the what would you call it? The physical appearance of, because Sora, his heart had gone because I just don't want to spoil things. I don't want to spoil things.
You're good.
So I'm sorry.
You're good. So
essentially, Ventus was in Sora's heart. Therefore, when things happen, Roxas ends up looking like Ventus because that is technically possible within their world's rules.
So have you seen this video? I'm sending it to you right now.
People can explain that better than me in the comments. I know there's a lot of you. I understand it. I am afraid of spoiling games for people who haven't played them yet. So I don't want to say everything that happens in Kingdom Hearts 1 and Birth by Sleep and all of that stuff. But I think it's enough to say that Sora's got a lot going on in this region. And it confuses even him to the point where he will see someone and he'll cry a tear because he recognizes them, but it's not him who recognizes them. It's the essentially the spirit living in his heart that recognizes him, that is of a different person. Yes, you showed me this on Twitter.
So this is a perfect representation of what I feel when I'm watching anything related to Kingdom Hearts.
No,
because of
the darkness will be the light.
If you guys haven't seen it, what I showed him was the Pro ZD Kingdom Hearts video that came out recently. It's like they're doing their Kingdom Hearts story line, and it's just like, ugh, what now, and who's who, and why is what, and where, what the fetch.
It makes sense if you don't follow it. I totally understand that. I totally do. But following it, the story gets cool. It's like a Korean drama. The first few episodes are like, you're really confused because they just start throwing things at you and you don't know who's who or what's when or any of that. But as the story goes, you get it, and it's just super cool and dramatic and fun. That's Kingdom Hearts. And the whole fact that, because we got to get back to the Monsters Inc. thing, the whole fact that they're putting it, you know, in the context of these Disney worlds just gives you, like, they're not super relevant usually. It's like, oh, the Heartless are here. Okay, go kick them out. Okay, now the Heartless are here. Okay, go kick them out, or whatever. The nobodies or the what do they call them? I said uneducated. Oh, what do they call them? The unversed. The unversed. Or whatever it is, like, go kick him out, right? And then the story unfolds as usual. But it provides a really cool backdrop to what's going on. And I personally, because no other game really does this, but I do get excited, just as the video that Mike's talking about shows. It's like, hey, let's work out the story. Toy Story. Oh, yeah. Super stoked. Let's get this. All right. Okay. Now the light and the dark and these people. Okay. It gets all confusing. But Monsters, Inc. Booyah. Like, let's do it.
That's how I felt.
The game looks so fun. It looks so freaking fun. Even if you don't understand what's going on, and I don't think anyone really does have like a super good grasp, other than Nomura himself probably. It's freaking fun, dude, and the game looks so fun. It looks so fun.
Yeah, I was just gonna say, like, that's exactly how I felt when I saw Monsters Inc. Because that's my favorite Pixar movie is Monsters Inc. I think it's for me at least, easily the cleverest of all the Pixar films, in my opinion.
Sure.
Monsters, like the whole idea.
And I mentioned this before, but in the other podcast, you guys don't know. I probably don't need to say that. Anyways, the idea of opening doors, you open a door and you walk to a different place, like a different world, essentially, a different domain. That's Kingdom Hearts right there. That fits into Kingdom Hearts perfectly. So the Mike Wazowski, the Monsters Inc. like world fits Kingdom Hearts so well. It's like a hand in a glove.
Fits like a glove, and it's my favorite Pixar film. So, like, I saw when they revealed Toy Story earlier, and just how almost perfectly like the movies that world looks within the game. It was just like, dude. Okay, I'm excited to play them two places. I'm all about that. Oh yeah. I wish that they would have Sword in the Stone. That'll never happen. That's my favorite Disney animated movie.
There's a few that
they'll never, because
they're already on to like Tangled and Big Hero 6 and all the Pixar stuff. Like they're
those are awesome too, though. I think all of the worlds they've selected that we've seen so far for this game are really cool.
Yeah.
But like you said,
I think so.
The Disney worlds almost never have anything to do with like furthering the plot of Kingdom Hearts.
Other than the battle between light and dark, right? Which every Disney movie has.
But
it's really not that relevant.
I'm always stoked for that part, and then it's just like the games, and it's funny that the games that I think focus I almost said heaviestly. Holy fetch.
The heaviestly. We already recorded this podcast once, people.
The most heavily,
We're trying to do it again.
Like Birth by Sleep, the Kingdom Hearts games that focus the most heavily on the Kingdom Hearts plot are the ones that lose me the most. It's like,
sure.
I just this is too
I would
out
say
there for me.
It does. It takes some of the fun out, but it puts back in some complexity and some mind games, I guess, some things that you can kind of think about and work through. It's a give take, but each way I still see it as a positive, because it's cool. I prefer the more Disney worlds, I guess, but they're not super relevant, so it's like we don't need those for the story. And the more you really want just the story and less going off and doing random things and more like actually progressing the plot, the more you kind of don't want as many Disney worlds, if that makes sense. The more you really just want Kingdom Hearts and figure out where this story's going.
Some people who argue that they wish that there weren't Disney worlds in Kingdom Hearts and that they just focused on
And
that
those
stuff.
people are just wrong.
I'm like,
they're just wrong people.
Whoa.
And there are wrong people in the world.
That's like the one fun thing about it for me is those Disney worlds.
I know, dude. I wouldn't have played it otherwise.
But in any case,
oh yeah, go ahead.
I was going to say the what they show mostly in this new trailer is combat, and the combat for me is the part that I've always liked about Kingdom Hearts the best.
Yeah.
And I especially love the like the really hard optional bosses in Kingdom Hearts 1 and 2, like trying to defeat Sephiroth and stuff like that. Like some of my
the lingering will.
Yeah.
Yeah.
My some of my best memories with Kingdom Hearts come from me and my buddy Brad Woods over at his house on the PS2, just trying to like beat Sephiroth and like playing it over and over and over and over and over and failing, getting pissed off and like trying to like change tactics and adapt and like figure out the pattern, and it's tough. And so I think that it has really, really good combat, always has, and I'm excited to play this game. I'm not sure that I care much about anything that's happening in the story, but
I do. I still want to figure out all the 13 Seekers of Darkness and all that stuff.
But that's
oh yeah, and the character models for Monsters Inc. They didn't look quite as good as Toy Story.
That's true.
And I think Nomura, or at least somebody on the team, was saying around the time these trailers were released, maybe a little after, that they aren't done yet with the models. They're still updating and texturing, and the models will look more like the films when the game actually comes out. But for now, this is what they had, and it still looks good. It's just not quite as perfect as the Toy Story one was.
Yeah. Yeah, I think it's harder too. I mean, with Toy Story's textures, like it's very a lot of it's meant to look sort of plasticky, so there's like a very smooth texture surface on a lot of the toys that I think is more easily rendered to look realistic than fur, for instance.
Totally. Yeah, Mike or Sully.
Yeah.
Sully, dude. And even in the movie, I remember in Monsters Inc. when he falls into the snow world where he finds the Yeti or the Abominable Snowman, and he's just laying in the snow, and the wind's blowing, and the camera just like it's really close on his fur, and it's just swaying in the wind, and it's like, God, that's a lot of computing power. Yep. I don't know that we're going to get something that looks that good.
That's like 90 that's like 90 hours per frame level rendering.
Yeah, exactly. It would take a really long time. So to render it on the fly with the GPU, it's not going to look that good, but it's going to look better than what we saw in the trailer.
Yeah. But I am most excited for that world of all the worlds that they've announced. That's going to be sweet.
Oh yeah.
So yeah, Kingdom Hearts 3 coming out later this year. Get stoked. Okay, next one is from Dude McGuy. He asks, which is your favorite Final Fantasy title logo? Okay, let me pull them up here. Final Fantasy title logos. So there's a very interesting correlation that I have discovered with the quality, or let's not call it quality. Let's not go there. Let's not piss people off too bad. With the philosophy of design of Final Fantasy games, and then the complexity of the Final Fantasy logos. There's a very strong correlation.
There is a correlation.
Correlation does not equal causation. I will not blame the decline of Final Fantasy on the logos, but there's a strong correlation between the two that cannot be ignored.
Nothing wrong with pointing that out.
Final Fantasies 1 through 9 have, for the most part, very simple, sleek logos that are centered on the words Final Fantasy, on the title of the game, with an image to supplement it in the background.
One thing, typically.
Yeah.
Not always, but usually one thing that symbolizes the game.
Yeah. Very, very simple. And for the most part, not all. I don't think that Final Fantasy 2, for instance, is included in this, or 3. I think 2 and 3 are the most complex visually of all of those logo designs. But for the most part, they follow kind of fundamental graphic design principles, especially with logo design, where you want to pass. I don't think this is the technical word for it. So forgive me if I say the wrong thing. I'm not a graphic designer by trade, but the silhouette test, right? So if you take the logo and you make it black and white and you're just looking at the silhouette, can you still recognize that's McDonald's or that's Facebook or that's whatever
or
company?
That's the Final Fantasy VII logo?
Yeah. Generally, you want to be able to, without seeing all of the crazy detail and all the color, to just see the outline of something and recognize it immediately. It's an iconic image, an iconic symbol that represents your brand and that you can recognize almost immediately, no matter if it's small on the screen, big on the screen, whether you have color or not. Just the outline, bam, I know what that is. Final Fantasy 1, Final Fantasy 4 especially, which is my favorite, by the way. My favorite is Final Fantasy 4 with Kain and the Dragoon helmet kind of at profile, and he's holding the spear and he's standing kind of on one leg. Final Fantasy 5 is pretty good. A little bit more difficult if you're just looking at the silhouette, but 6 especially. 7, I think the most of all of them is very, very easy to recognize because of the shape of the meteor there in the background. It's easier to silhouette that. 8 with Squall and Renoa, it's fine, I guess. And the 9 with the crystal, also a very easy shape to recognize. Okay, then we start moving into the freaking crazy stuff.
The teens.
Final Fantasy X and forward, almost every single one of them does not center the title. Final Fantasy, whatever number, is off center in the image, whether it's to the side or way down or it's way off center. And you have these just enormously complex images behind them. Just like Final Fantasy 14s especially is just like, what on earth 14s is that?
Insane. It's like an amalgamation of weapons and people, and it's like a black hole is sucking everything into the middle, and it's like all this stuff is just like around it. It's like freaking insane.
I get it. It's an MMO. You can be a whole bunch of different classes in it. And that's what all the weapons and all the characters symbolize, all these different classes. I get it. The freaking image you're using is way too complex, in my opinion, for a good logo design. Final Fantasy 13's is very complex as well, with all the strands and the crazy shapes coming off of it. Again, if you've played the game, you'll know exactly what that is. It's basically a spoiler for the game. But it's just too complex. It's not an immediately recognizable image unless you're a huge mega Final Fantasy fan or something. But you silhouette that and show it to someone, no one's going to be able to know what the freak that's supposed to represent. Final Fantasy 11 has like an entire army marching. It's just like
there's 1,000 different things. Yeah,
complex, very, very complex. Final Fantasy 15 is not as complex, but still pretty. Especially when you add Noctis into it.
Yeah.
When you unlock Noctis, after you beat the game and Noctis comes into the logo, it's just like so much going on.
Like you can show a character, but for some reason they had to add a little dragon like sneaking around behind her, like the sneaky tiny little dragon, like beep, and then like a halo of like a ton of weapons that you get in the game behind her head and stuff. And it's like you just didn't need that. Have the woman with her flowing robes or whatever she's wearing, have her doing her pose on the Final Fantasy logo without anything else. Like you can have a center point, a focal point that is helping to, show what the game is about. And you don't need to add everything in the game. 15 does a lot less than like 13 and 11 and 14, but it's still too much. Like simplify it.
A lot of people have told me that they really like Final Fantasy XII's logo. And while I agree...
It's cool. It's imposing.
I agree that Galbranth, the pose he's got, the detail, it's a really cool image from just an art perspective. But as a logo, it's just overly complex. It diminishes the title. Final Fantasy is the smallest of all the Final Fantasy titles. It is the smallest in terms of total composition within the image in Final Fantasy XII. It's shrunk way down at the bottom, and he's standing, and he's the center now, and the words Final Fantasy are not. And I don't like that. I don't like that they've moved it from center in all of these. It's more focused on the art in the background than it is on Final Fantasy. Title, yeah. And they're overly complex. And I find a strong correlation with the over complexity and the focus on style in the later Final Fantasy game logos is reflective of their focus on style and their obsession with graphical quality. And it just really parallels at exactly the same time that Hironobu Sakaguchi he goes out of Square Enix upper management and then eventually leaves the company. And the simplicity of Final Fantasy, I think, has been lost. They've tried to become more and more complex, I think, since then. And I think that it's just funny to me that the logo design is the same way. They
parallel each other very, very closely.
Yeah. Again, not speaking on the quality. Quality is subjective. If you love Final Fantasy 13, that's totally fine. But it's undoubtable to me that Final Fantasy games have really tried to become more and more complex and bigger and have all this stuff going on and just be like blow your mind visually and very stylized. And the simplicity that you get with, say, FF6 or something like that is kind of lost. It just doesn't feel the same. And I'm repeating myself, but the logo design is the same way.
There you go.
So, but to answer the question, Final Fantasy IV is my favorite one. I love the Dragoon silhouette. I think that's like a very iconic design. I love the helmet and everything, and so I believe that they used that or a similar one. They used first, is it Stormblood, Final Fantasy XIV Stormblood or Heavensward maybe.
Oh yeah.
Anyways, one of their the newer expansions uses that side profile of a Dragoon in it, and it's just like that always looks sick to me.
Yeah,
the Dragoon class is best class.
My favorite was 7. 7's logo and title.
It's very good. Cool. Good stuff. All right, let's move on to our next topic. This one's from Hat89. Whenever Final Fantasy VI is brought up, I often hear people state that they love how the story does not have a true main character. This was an interesting design choice, and if you fast forward 10 to 15 years, Square has stated that they tried to use a similar style of storytelling for both Final Fantasy XII and Final Fantasy XIII. What is it about the way that FF6 did it that made it so special for people, whereas FF12 and FF13 were so divisive? Basically, why did it work in FF6 but not so much in these other games, aside from the fact that I absolutely love FF12? That's from Hat89. Okay. I like Final Fantasy XII. I think it's a great game.
We talked about this for a bit, and I think that we could kind of work through a couple of different ideas, but for me, the more solid conclusion that I could come to on this topic was that Final Fantasy 12 has multiple different characters, but in all of these cases they may say that there isn't a true main character, and in playing the games there may not necessarily be a true one single main character in the archetypal sense, but there is a main character still in terms of their artwork, their advertising. They're typically in any game, the very first character that you play as is the main character of the game, unless things happen that are understandable, such as Kingdom Hearts 2, right? The whole thing with Roxas, you kind of get what happens there when the game shifts focus over to Sora. But with these Final Fantasy games, these characters kind of stick throughout the whole game. And so talking about the iconic imagery of a game, like Cloud's sword from Final Fantasy VII, the Buster Sword. You have that sword for less than an hour of the game. For 95% of that game, you are not using that sword. But if you were ever to portray Cloud, or if you're ever showing Cloud, or if you're ever drawing Cloud or any of that stuff, you are going to draw him with that sword 90-something% of the time, even though he's rarely actually using it in the game. So you can't just look at the outfit of the game and say, oh, who's the main character here? Because the company when they're selling you the game through their advertising, through their artwork, through their titles and all that stuff, and through just the intro of the game, you are supposed to have an idea of who this game is based around. And a game without a main character, a story without a main character, is not one that humans typically identify well with, because it's not archetypal. You need a hero. You need a character that you're following. And without that, games have or any story has a difficult time of succeeding. So I would argue that even in the case of Final Fantasy VI, there is more of a main character than you would think. And in Final Fantasy 12, I played as Vaughn throughout the whole game. And like, I didn't realize until a few hours into the game that I even could change who I was walking around the world. I knew I could change in battle, but not in the world. But even after I realized that, it was like, well, this is who the game people who made the game wanted me to play as, so this is who I'm playing as. And
I believe even
that's kind of where I'm at.
In FF12, like when you're out in the world where you can encounter enemies, you can, whoever is in your party lead is who you run around as.
Yeah.
But then when you go into towns, towns, it makes you play as Vaughn though. Like you can't switch who you are when running around the towns. You have
so Vaughn is pretty well forced on you as the main character, even if you don't want.
Yep.
Right.
Yeah, I think that a lot of that is true. It's kind of what you were talking about with the Buster Sword. That's kind of true with the character, main character from the Elder Scrolls V, Skyrim. His armor, which is it's not even a complete set. Some of it's heavy armor, some of it's light armor. Like it's a mixed matched set, but it's an iconic look that they used in all of its marketing.
Yeah.
But no one playing the game.
Most people never had
playing the game.
Saw in the game.
And you wouldn't even want it because again, if you mix heavy and light armor, you don't get certain bonuses and stuff. So it's freaking crazy. Like you actually put on the legit armor from the marketing and it's like, this is not a good idea. You shouldn't wear this. But marketing is powerful. And so I think before I get into that though, I would say that I don't personally think that, at least I don't believe that to a large degree most people were bothered by the idea of not having a main character in Final Fantasy 12 or 13. I don't think anyone who has a problem with those games lists that anywhere near the top of the list of reasons why they didn't like it.
Yeah, it's true.
Right. So I don't know if those games weren't well received because of the idea of, well, who's the main character? I want a main character or whatever. This game doesn't have a main character. All of them are main characters or something like that. I also agree that in Final Fantasy VI, despite the fact that that was the idea behind it, and they gave lots and lots of screen time to the other characters like Locke and Sabin and Edgar and Celeste, even still, like, I think it's, at least to me, pretty clear that Terra is the main character of the story. The entire plot surrounds her true identity and what the Empire is after due to the fact that that's her true identity and whatnot. So the plot is very centered on her, despite the fact that there are lots of subplots and character arcs that come into play that are given lots of screen time with the other characters. So while they share a pretty equal amount of screen time, it's still hard for me to say that Terra is not the main character of Final Fantasy VI. And like you said, I think that just comes down to the fact that the more characters you add and the more time you've got to spend developing a huge cast of people, I think just the higher the risk of slowing your pace, bogging your pace down too much. A lot of people complain about FF7's story for that reason, right? Now, while Cloud's obviously the main character in that, I would say the side characters, aside from the two optional ones, do get a ton of screen time devoted to their backstories. And a lot of that comes at the expense of moving the plot forward. So after the Nibelheim incident, the plot becomes we're chasing Sephiroth. And while they're chasing Sephiroth across the world, they learn about Barrett's town, and they learn about Red 13's history and his Cosmo Canyon place, and they learn about Tifa and Cloud and Nibelheim, and then they learn about Sid and Rocket Town, and you're introduced to the people, and you learn about their history, their personal history, and that all that time, the plot of the story is not moved forward at all. So I'm guessing that if anyone has a problem with stories that don't have an identifiable, clear main character, that have lots of characters, right? That could be one reason, is that it's hard to pace stories where if there's any focus on plot, or the plot needs to move somewhere, but you've got all these people involved and developing all of them, there's so much time that has to be taken to doing that it can really bog the pace down. So that could be part of the reason. I know that FF12 does have that problem a little bit with pacing a story. Final Fantasy 13 is very character focused, and the plot, I think, I don't want to say it suffers for it, but it definitely takes a while to sort of get the plot moving, because the characters are spending so much time running away from the problem, or kind of like figuring out what their place is in all of the events that are going on, and whether they want to be involved or not. So there's so much time dedicated to that the plot stalls a bit. And I would say it is also true of Final Fantasy VI, to be honest. Like, the big part of the plot happens that I won't spoil, and then there's a whole back end of the game that's spent like recollecting the characters again, and like the plot kind of like really slows down there, and it's real focused on gathering the characters and developing the characters and bringing the characters back together again. And there's a lot of depth there. If you love character-driven stories, I think that another good example of this is freaking like the Game of Thrones stories, well, the show, but like the Song of Ice and Fire series, the novels, right?
Right.
Every chapter moves to a different character who are on totally different places in the world, and it's almost impossible to say in that show. I mean, you could say it's Daenerys, and you could say it's Jon Snow mostly, but I mean, like, there's so many characters there that they spend so much time with. It's hard to say at first, like, who is like the main character here.
Right.
So it's not that can't work. It's just that stories with that many characters.
Who's the main character of the Lord of the Rings?
I mean, Frodo, but
right.
Can you really say
essentially? No, because half of the Two Towers and half of Return of the King, he's not there.
Yeah. Half of the story is dedicated to other people.
Yeah.
It's a very good point.
And Aragorn and Merry and Pippin and those. But, I mean, Frodo's still the main character. It's Frodo. Like, obviously, that's the main character. But these stories focus so much on these other people. But I think the important thing is, and this is maybe the case with Game of Thrones as well, the plot is still moving forward, even when you're experiencing these other people's stories. Whereas maybe in Final Fantasy VII, that's not exactly the case.
Yeah. Yeah, that's a good point, actually. You can definitely have stories that keep moving forward plot-wise, despite
and that's why I would say with
Game
of Thrones, you can still have Daenerys or Jon Snow be the main character, even though you don't see them as often. And one character you thought was dead for years, right? Or like, I don't know. It's like they can still be the main character of the story overall, just not necessarily, they don't get as much screen time as you would expect.
Yeah. Going back to the marketing, though, I would say that for FF12 and FF13, especially with FF13, Lightning was pushed so heavily in the marketing.
So heavy, yeah.
I mean, for a decade almost. I mean, from 2008 or 9, when the game was in development, and then getting ready to release in 2010, all the way through until Lightning Returns was wrapped, and they started to really push Final Fantasy 15. I mean, that was a long stretch of Square Enix life where Lightning was basically the face of the company for a long time.
Totally. And Lightning is like the most popular Final Fantasy character in Japan.
Yeah.
So
she's on the
I don't know,
cover of the
whether
game.
You think she's the main character or not, she is the face of Final Fantasy 13.
Yeah. I mean, there's no doubt about it. And at least for the first 7 chapters, while they are divvying away once in a while following these 2 characters for a bit, the majority of the time you are following Lightning and you are controlling Lightning, like, because you can't choose who the party leader is for a long time in the game. So like I would say the majority of the time you are playing as Lightning for the first half of the game. So again, she is, I think, pretty recognizably the main character of FF13, despite the fact that they do spend a lot of time dedicating to the development of all 6 characters. But again, that's something that I think it's important too. If you want to tell a story that has lots of characters in it, and you don't want any one of them to be considered a main character, they're all kind of on the same level. I'm actually doing, basically, I just realized that I didn't do it intentionally, but in the book I'm writing, I'm basically doing the same thing. But focus on 4 to 6 guys, not like 12 or 13 or 15 guys or girls. 20, I just mean like people, like 15, 20 people. Like the more you have, and this is true of FF6, I should say, for sure. Like, despite the fact that there are like 12 characters in the game, you can't tell me that Ga is given the same amount of development or screen time, or can be considered a main character in the same way that Terra or Sabin or Edgar or Celeste are, or Locke. No way. Just not even close. Yeah. So I would say that that story still has like a core of 5 people that are really the leaders, that really push it forward, that are really the main characters, despite the fact that there are all these other characters on top of that.
You know, I remember something else about Final Fantasy 12. Like, I remember the reason why I kept Vaughn as in my party. Now, first of all, whoever you play at first, at the very beginning of the game, is who you identify with initially, especially through gameplay, not through cutscenes. Because when you're controlling someone, there's like a bond between you and the character. It's like that character is an extension of you to some degree, right? And so you identify with them immediately off the bat. But in Final Fantasy 12, it was Vaughn, right? And he's, this kid, he's got, he wants to go be a pirate, or he wants to go do some big thing in the world, but he gets caught up in events that are way bigger than he is, and he is completely out of his depth. And even the dream he had and what he thought he was going to do when he finally left the city turned out to be nothing at all like what the adventure he ended up having. And he was just kind of along for the ride, right? But he was the only character that I was confident would never leave my party. Because when you play an RPG and you level up certain characters and suddenly they're like, I have to leave, and they're out, and all you guys are a way lower level because you're strongest person left. I hate it when that happens so much. And I realize now this is why I played as Vaughn throughout the entire game. He was always in my party. He was always the head of my party because I knew he would never leave. Bosch came and went. Ash came and went. Larsa came and went. Pinello kind of sometimes was there and not there at other times. Like, Vaughn was the only one where I was like, hey, if I'm going to get anyone to be super strong and the strongest character in my party, it's going to be the one that's not going to leave. Like freaking Fran and Balthier, they come and go. Like, I could not be sure. So it bugs me like crazy whenever a strong member of my party leaves and I have to use one of the crappy people I haven't been using all game. So anyways, that's the real reason. But regardless, he is who I started out playing as, and I just kind of saw it through to the end. And I don't have a problem with it. He maybe shouldn't have been the main character of that particular story, but I'm okay with the way things kind of unfolded there. So I still see him as being, the main character of the story, even though he's just kind of an observer for at least half of it.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, so it's a struggle. I mean,
the main character of The Hobbit is probably Thorin Oakenshield, not Bilbo. But you're seeing the whole thing unfold in front of Bilbo through his eyes, and so you kind of, that's true. He's essentially the main character, but he's not. As far as the plot goes, he's not nearly as important as Gandalf or Thorin.
Yeah, it's tricky, and I think that like you're saying, we have certain archetypes in storytelling. There are certain things people expect that are kind of hard to go. It's not impossible. It's tough to go against the grain and have people. Not follow it is the right word, but a lot of people complained about FF12 with Vaughn and Pinello's involvement in the story because it was like, well, the story, they have no reason to be there. It's not about them, right? They are literally they basically are the Bilbo of Final Fantasy 12. Totally. It's just their perspective. Their perspective is how we're meant to view the story of Final Fantasy 12. But the story is not about those characters, and so I mean, storytelling. If you're gonna try and not have a main character, there are some hurdles to overcome there. But it can be done for sure. But I don't think that idea is the reason why people were upset about FF12.
Yeah, I agree. Yeah.
So, okay. Last question from Chocolate Rob. Where and what is the Promised Land? Promised Land from Final Fantasy VII. Okay. There's a quote from Elder Hargo from Cosmo Canyon. Hold on. I gotta pull it up here. So this quote was one that I was upset that I didn't show in my current playthrough of Final Fantasy VII over on Twitch that I do on Fridays, because it's a missable dialogue. You go back later in the game, he won't say it. He only says it at a specific point in the story. But as most people who played FF7 know, the Promised Land is believed to be a physical place where it's abundant in Mako energy. So Shinra takes that assumption and basically goes all in, and they are trying to find the Promised Land so they can harvest all this Mako and just tons of profit and just make a bunch of money. And anyways, that's what they think it is. But Elder Hargo at Cosmo Canyon says this. I think it's the first time you go through Cosmo Canyon. If you go around talking to the elders, you'll find him, and he'll say this. The Promised Land. So you want to know? There is no one place called the Promised Land. That's what I believe. No, it does exist. You can say that too. In other words, it doesn't exist for us, but it did for the ancients. The Promised Land is the resting place of the ancients. The life of the ancients is one continuous journey, a journey to grow trees and plants, produce animals, and raise Mako energy. Their harsh journeys continue throughout their lives. The place they return to after their long journey, their burial land, is the Promised Land. Supreme happiness? Well, I believe that for the ancients. It was the moment that they were able to return to their planet. At that moment, they were released from their fate and gained their supreme happiness. At least that's what I believe. I really don't know whether or not it's the truth now. As is the case with many characters in Final Fantasy VII, sometimes they'll have even a majority of the truth, but not the whole truth. For a long time in that game, Sephiroth has the wrong idea about what the ancients are, who he is, what Jenova is. Professor Gast didn't have it figured out until late. So they're telling you, they're building the world through the eyes of people who don't really know what's going on for the first half of it. And I think that's what adds to a lot of confusion for people who are confused about the story. They get that early exposition and they think, oh, that's what the Promised Land means. Oh, that's what Jenova is. Oh, that's what the ancients are. But the truth is that most of these people, they don't even freaking know what they're talking about. So it's revealed later, sometimes in dialogue boxes like this that are optional and missable, sometimes in scenes that are optional and missable. There's a lot of that story that you don't get unless you see everything. But in any case, I think that this is made pretty clear in the ending of the game, where after you've beat the final boss, Cloud is standing there and he sees strands of the life stream kind of flowing around him, and then he sees Aerith's hand reaching out to him, and he reaches out to her, and then the ground starts shaking, and there's an earthquake, and Tifa's calling out to him and reaching out to him, and he jumps over there, and then he says to her something like, I finally understand, and then something about I can meet her there, or I can see her there, and her is supposed to be Aerith. And he realizes Aerith is in the life stream. And that is essentially what the Promised Land is, in my opinion, is the life stream itself, returning back to the planet. The reaching supreme happiness is the return back to the collective knowledge and power of everything that returns back to the planet in the life stream. At least that's what Elder Hargo believes, and I agree with him. His philosophy is convincing. Though I just noticed at the beginning of this, he says that it's a place that's only for the ancients and it's not for us regular people.
Yeah, and he said it exists for them.
But the life stream, at least according to Bugenhagen, when he shows they go up into his observatory and it shows the planets and shows the people
that's one of the coolest parts of the game.
dissolving back into the life stream. All life returns back to the life stream, according to him. So I would say that's one part of Elder Hargo's thing here that's maybe a bit off, that everyone returns to the life stream. But that's what I would say that the life stream is, or that the Promised Land is. If it's not that, it is at least a spiritual place, not a physical place that you can find and harvest Mako energy from. So
and sell it.
Shinra is wrong about what it is, at least. I know that much.
At the very least, you likely have the wrong idea. No, I would agree with that. Aerith does some really interesting stuff. When I first played the game, that scene where Aerith, spoilers for people who haven't played Final Fantasy VII or don't know what happens. Give people a second. Okay, so Aerith dies, and when she leaves, in that scene when she goes off on her own, and everyone's like, "Oh no, Aerith left," and they're trying to find her, and then they find her, and Sephiroth gets there first. The way I saw it was Aerith was stupid, and she left and went alone and didn't know she was going to die. And then, oh no, she got killed. Sephiroth happened to be waiting in ambush and killed her and threw her off, right? And that's the way I perceived it when I was like 14 or 13 or whenever I first played the game. And the way I see the scene now and in subsequent playthroughs since that first time I played it was like, and there's some dialogue that says this a little more explicitly, but Aerith knew what she was doing. She knew where she was going. She knew what was probably going to happen to her, and she was okay with it. And that is kind of what makes me agree with you here, Mike, was that Aerith figured out something. And through all the information that she knew that she wasn't necessarily sharing with everybody else, but that you knew that she knew additional stuff because she's an ancient and all that, and that she had come to terms with how best to help the world and how best to help herself. And that necessitated her kind of abandoning the physical realm in some terms and going to be part of the live stream and influencing things there from the next stage of her life. And it's funny because when you look at it that way and when you see it the way it was seriously, the way it was likely intended to be seen, it's not as like totally sad. I mean, it's still sad, but it's not as tragic an end of Aerith as I had originally thought. And she knows where she's going, and that like it just gives credence to the idea that the Promised Land, like look at how happy she was, or even in the works past Final Fantasy VII. When you look at like Advent Children and the way she talks to Cloud, and at the end the way she's like with Zack in that doorway, and she's a happy person. Like she found purpose and meaning. She's not lost anymore. She knows what she's doing, and she's doing a good job of it as far as I can tell. But she found what she was looking for, and everyone knows the ancients were, trying to look for or create or whatever the Promised Land. So I would say, yeah, I would totally agree with you based on the evidence that I can see in the game.
Yep.
It's a spiritual place. It's not a real place. And Aerith totally found it and went there. And she is not upset about that.
If anyone has evidence that the Promised Land is a physical place to which you can harvest Mako energy or something like that, if another idea on it, let me know. But I'm pretty sure I'm right.
Because in Final Fantasy IX, there is that other continent that has all the mist and all of the magic energies that are like free flowing over there. That you don't, they're not as much. Yeah, they're not as much in the main continent you're in, but once you cross that barrier and you go to the next world, it's like, dang, this stuff's abundant. And I think that's more or less the idea that Shinra had, and it shows in some of the other Final Fantasy games. But in that specific game, we don't see. We go all around that world. We don't see anything like that.
Ain't no promised land around there.
Ain't there? It might be in space somewhere.
That's what Sephiroth thinks in Advent Children, I guess. He's like, I'm going to use this planet as a vessel to go throughout the cosmos. I don't know if he's still trying to find the promised land at that point, though. I think he had realized at that point that...
Right. Because he had this delusion himself that the promised land was a physical place and that the ancients were cultivating it. And then when Genova came and attacked, the ancients kind of protected everything, but they all essentially just about died and protected all the people. And then the people come around and take advantage of all the stuff the ancients had done and built up at the time. And he's like, oh, screw you guys. But, it turns out that what the ancients were building, I mean, it was just a temporary thing, that the real promised land was something else. Yeah, he kind of just missed that.
Figured it out while he was in the live stream traveling to the North Crater. They came out of it, and he was even more messed up. He just decided to
I know. I feel bad for Sephiroth. He just kind of went from thing to thing. Like, he felt like he was in charge. And by all measures, he was the most powerful being on the planet. But he didn't have his crap together. He just couldn't see things, and he kept getting thrown for loops on who he is and where he's from, like, over and over.
Yep. Oh, Sephiroth. He could have been so great.
You could have been a contender. You were the chosen one.
He was the chosen one, dude. He was. Anyways,
I think we're done.
It's the end of our podcast. Thanks, everybody.
Sorry, guys. That was a little rushed, but it is what it is. You better enjoy it.
Let us know let us know what you guys would like us to talk about next time, either in the comments, on Patreon. Join our Discord if you want to do that. We have a podcast chat in Discord. You can ask questions to us there too. And if you're listening to this podcast audio only, come check out our YouTube, Dark Pixel Gaming. Have a Final Fantasy 13 review coming out next Monday. I know I said that last week, but this time it's for real. This time it is really happening. I'm going to go work on it right now as we speak. I finally captured all the rest of the footage that I need, so I can actually finish it up. So look forward to that. See you guys next week. Peace out.